What if Westeros took the Night's Watch seriously? Not in the polite, distant way they occasionally did. A gold dragon donated here. A criminal sentenced to the wall instead of a cell there. The occasional Lord's second son sent north out of tradition rather than belief. What if they actually believed it? What if they looked north and said, yes, that is the thing that ends everything. Not Targaryens in Essos. Not a bastard's claim. Not the Iron Throne or the Lannister debt or the succession crisis that has been building since Robert started drinking professionally. The dead. The army of the dead. The thing the Night's Watch has been describing in increasingly desperate ravens for 30 years that the small council has been rooting to a draw somewhere and forgetting. What if someone made them look? The answer is not a hero arriving with a sword. The answer is not a prophecy or a chosen one or the specific narrative convenience of the right person in the right place at the right moment. The answer is messier and harder and more interesting than that. The answer is a dying king, an honest man, a letter, and the specific particular stubbornness of people who had already made up their minds being forced to change them. The answer is Jon Arryn, who was Lord of the Eyrie and Hand of the King, and who died knowing two things that the realm was not ready to hear, and who, in this version, in this history, wrote them both down before the poison had fully done its work, and gave the letter to a man he trusted absolutely. He gave it to Ned Stark. Ned read it. Ned did not manage it carefully. Ned Stark did what Ned Stark always did, with information he believed to be true and important and dangerous. He went to the king directly, and he said it plainly, and he refused to soften it, and he refused to let Robert dismiss it, and the conversation that followed changed everything. This is not a story about a world without consequences. It is a story about what happens when people with power choose to use it toward the right thing at the right moment, instead of 30 years too late. Some of them are too late anyway, but not all of them. King's Landing, the letter, 298 AC. Jon Arryn had been dying for 6 days when he wrote the letters. The maester thought he was sleeping. He wasn't sleeping. He was lying in the bed with the specific stillness of a man who has accepted something and is using the acceptance to do one last useful thing, before the useful things were no longer available to him. He wrote 3. The first was to his wife, which said things that were private, and remained private, and that is where they belong. The second was to Lisa, which said things he should have said years ago, and was too late now, but he said them anyway, because too late is not the same as not said. The third was to Ned Stark. The third said, Ned, I am dying. This is not unexpected. You will know by the time you read this that I suspected the cause and could not prove it. And I leave that to you to manage as you see fit, because you will manage it correctly, even when correctly is hard. There are 2 things I need you to know. The first is the Queen's children. I will not write the name, but you know the name. You have suspected it since Bran Baratheon and before him. The records are clear if you look at the right records. This matters politically, but it is not what I am asking you to act on today. The second is what I should have acted on years ago, and didn't because I was being careful, and careful was the wrong response to it. The Night's Watch reports. The ones that have been coming for 30 years. The ones we've been filing. Ned, they are real. I spent 6 months reading them properly, all of them. And the pattern is not the pattern of men exaggerating wilderness raids. The pattern is of something building, something organized, something with a direction. If Robert was ever going to listen to this, it would be now. Not from a small council. From you. From you directly, in private, the way he listens to you and to no one else. Tell him, Don't manage it. Don't soften it. Tell him what the reports say and make him look at them with you. He will be furious. Tell him anyway. Do this before anything else. Before the succession question, before Cersei, before everything. Because if the wall fails, nothing else matters. I should have been braver years ago. Be braver than me. Jon Arryn Ned read the letter on the road south. He read it twice. He arrived in King's Landing and he went to Robert directly that night, before anything else, and he told Robert he needed 1 hour and a private room, and Robert had looked at his face and given him both. The Red Keep, Ned and Robert, 298 AC. He put the reports on the table. Not a summary, not an explanation first. He put 30 years of Night's Watch ravens on the table in front of Robert Baratheon, sorted by date, and he sat down across from his king and his oldest friend, and he said, "Read the bottom one first, then the one from 5 years ago, then the one from last month." Robert looked at the pile. "Ned, read them, please." Robert read them. He was not a man who read carefully as a rule. He read quickly and loudly, his lips moving slightly, the way people's lips moved when they learned to read before reading became habit, and the habit had never fully settled. But he read them. All three. When he put the last one down, he looked at Ned. He said, "How long have these been coming?" 30 years. And the small council has been filing them. Robert's jaw tightened. Who decided? Nobody decided. They arrived. People with more immediate concerns put them aside. Then they kept arriving and people kept putting them aside, and 30 years went by, and the concerns kept being more immediate than the wall. Ned looked at him. Until now, they're not. Robert stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his hands on the sill and looked at the city below him and said nothing for a while. Then, "You believe them?" "Yes." "All of them." "The specific claims vary. The pattern doesn't." Ned kept his voice level. "Something is building north of the wall, Robert. It has been building for decades, and the men whose job it is to know about it have been telling us. The maesters say. The maesters are wrong." He said it flat. Not about everything. About this. Robert turned from the window. He had the expression he got when he was angry at information rather than at the person delivering it, which was a specific kind of Robert anger that Ned had learned long ago was more productive than the other kind. "The watch," Robert said. "How many men?" 600. Castle Black is the only fully manned position. 2/3 of the wall's castles are unmanned. 600 men. Against whatever is building north of that wall. Yes. A silence. Robert said, "What do you need?" Ned said, "I need you to convene the lords. All of them. I need you to show them what I just showed you." He paused. "And I need you to believe it yourself before you do. Because they will follow your lead. And if you present it like something you're not certain about, they'll take their cue from the uncertainty." Robert looked at him. He said, "You're certain." "I've been reading these reports all week. I was skeptical when I started. I'm not skeptical now." Ned met his eyes. "When Ned Stark tells you something is certain, Robert, has he ever been wrong about it?" Robert thought about this. He said, "No." "Then believe me." Robert sat down. He looked at the reports. He said, "The succession." "After." "Cersei." "After." "The debt to..." "Robert." Ned cut him off, which he almost never did. "After. All of it. After. If the wall falls, the succession doesn't matter. The debt doesn't matter. There is nothing after the wall falls. We deal with this first." Robert was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Call the Lords, the Great Council, King's Landing, 298 AC. They came because Robert called them. Not all of them willingly. Tywin Lannister came from Casterly Rock with 40 bannermen and the specific manner of a man who has decided to attend something he expects to find irritating. The Tyrells sent Lady Olenna because Lord Mace was unavailable, and Lady Olenna because she was always more useful. Doran Martell sent his brother Oberyn, which said something about Doran's expectations for the tone of the gathering. They filled the throne room. Robert stood before them. Not on the throne. He'd asked Ned about this, and Ned had said, "Stand." Sitting is distance. This requires proximity. And he had the reports in his hand, and he looked like a man who had not slept well in 4 days because he hadn't. He said, "I'm not going to make a speech. I was going to make a speech, but Ned talked me out of it." A murmur. "Instead, I'm going to tell you what I've been reading for 4 days, and then I'm going to show you something, and then we're going to have an argument that I'm going to win, and then we're going to do something about it. Lord Tywin." "Your Grace, if you could clarify the subject." "The Night's Watch," Robert said. "The reports they've been sending us for 30 years, the ones we've been ignoring." He held up the stack of ravens. 30 years. I read all of them. A silence in the room. He put the ravens on the table that had been set up specifically for this. He said, "Lord Stark, tell them." Ned stepped forward. He spent 40 minutes. He was Ned Stark, which meant he did not dramatize, and he did not simplify, and he did not soften. He presented the ranging reports chronologically, the first accounts of unusual cold patterns, the missing rangers, the dead that came back wrong, the specific acceleration of events in the past 3 years. He presented it with the specific quality of a man reading a document rather than arguing a case, because the document was the case, and Ned's role was only to make sure no one missed it. When he finished, the room was not quiet. The room was the controlled noise of lords assessing information and finding it difficult to assess. Lord Tywin said, "The Night's Watch has been crying wolf for a century." Ned said, "The pattern before 30 years ago was incidental. The pattern since is directional. Those are different things." Lord Umber, the Greatjon, who had come down from the north and who looked at Ned with the specific northern recognition of a man who knows his own, stood up and said, "We've known in the north for years. Anyone who spent time past the wall knew something was wrong. We just couldn't." He stopped. Nobody down here would listen. Olenna Tyrell, from the back of the room, said, "What precisely are we looking at? Not the poetic version, the practical one." Ned said, "An organized force of the dead, animated by something or someone of significant power, moving south toward the wall at an accelerating rate. Fire and Valyrian steel appear to stop them. Normal weapons do not." The room erupted, not in panic, in argument, which was what Westerosi lords did with alarming information. They argued about the reliability of the reports, about whether the Watch's chroniclers were competent, about the distance between the reports and the throne room, and what that distance did to the accuracy of what arrived. Robert let it run for 15 minutes. Then he stood up. He said, loud enough that the room stopped, "Enough." They stopped. He said, "I've been king for 15 years, and I've been wrong about a lot of things. Ask Ned. He'll tell you. He tells me regularly." No one laughed. "I was wrong about not having more children. I was wrong about the treasury. I was wrong about Essos. And I was wrong about the Dothraki. And I am probably wrong about at least 3 things I haven't identified yet." He looked around the room. "I'm not wrong about this. I've read it. Ned has read it. Jeor Mormont has been living it for 20 years. The dead are walking north of that wall, and they are coming south, and we have 600 men and 3 manned castles. And if any of you leave this room without committing something to the response, you are gambling with every person in this realm." He looked at Tywin. He said, "Lord Tywin, you're the finest military mind I know. Tell me what 600 men can do against 100,000 dead." Tywin said, "Nothing." "That's what I thought." He looked at the room. "So we're going to fix that." The argument. What it cost. 298 AC. It was not clean. Ned had not expected it to be clean. The lords of Westeros had spent a generation learning to treat the Night's Watch as a disposal service for criminals and younger sons who had embarrassed their families, and you did not undo a generation of comfortable disbelief in one throne room on one morning. The argument went 3 days. Tywin opposed the initial proposal. Full mobilization, mandatory draft from each house, significant gold commitment, on the grounds that it was fiscally irresponsible and strategically premature. He said this with the full weight of the most economically powerful lord in the realm behind him, and 8 other lords immediately aligned with him, because aligning with Tywin Lannister was what cautious people did when cautious people had options. Ned said, "Fiscally irresponsible is a calculation that requires the realm to still exist when the accounting is done." Tywin said, "The threat, if real, it's real. If it escalates at the rate the reports suggest, we have years. We have time for a measured response." Ned said, "We have the time the wall gives us. The wall is currently defended by 600 men. How much time is that?" Tywin said, "That depends on what we're—" Mormont wrote last month that the cold front has moved 30 miles south in 6 weeks. At that rate, the wall faces direct contact within— Ned stopped himself. "Tywin, how long have you had the Watch's reports?" Tywin said nothing. Ned looked at him. "You've been reading them." "I have been keeping myself informed about—" "You've been reading them, and you've been calculating the same thing I have, and you've been deciding the timing wasn't right to bring it forward." Ned kept his voice even. He was not accusatory, he was precise. "The timing is now right." Tywin held his gaze for a moment, the full cold weight of it. Then he said, "The gold commitment is negotiable. The draft is not manageable as proposed. I would suggest a tiered system based on house wealth rather than uniform." "We can discuss the mechanism," Ned said. "The commitment itself is not negotiable." A pause. Tywin said, "Then we discuss the mechanism." That was day 2. Day 3 was the Tyrells. Lady Olenna said, "The Reach feeds the realm. If we commit Reach soldiers to the north, the harvest suffers. The harvest suffers. We have a food problem on top of a dead army problem. I'd like to understand how the king proposes to manage that." Robert said, "Honestly, I hadn't thought about that." Olenna said, "That is refreshing to hear from a king. Most of them pretend they had thought of everything." She looked at him. "If the Reach contributes soldiers, the Reach needs assurances about agricultural priorities, and I would like to discuss dragon glass." Robert blinked. "What about it?" "Dragonstone is Robert's fortress. Dragonstone is built on an island that produces volcanic glass in significant quantities. The reports describe volcanic glass as effective against the dead." She raised an eyebrow. "That seems relevant." Ned looked at Robert. Robert looked at Ned. He said, "I didn't know that." Ned said, "I didn't either." Olenna said, "I read obsessively. It is one of my better qualities." She folded her hands. "Mind the glass. Arm every man who goes north with it. This is not complicated." Ned said, "No, it's not." Olenna looked at him. "Lord Stark, you are considerably more interesting than you appear," he said. "I've been told that." "No, you haven't." She waved a hand. "Mind the glass. Settle the commitment. The Reach will send 10,000 soldiers and enough grain to feed 20,000 north of the Neck for 2 years. In exchange..." She paused. "In exchange, I would like a formal acknowledgement that the Reach's contribution is noted, because when this is over and people are writing the histories, I intend for the Tyrrells to be very prominently featured." Robert laughed. It was the first genuine laugh in 3 days, and the room exhaled around it. He said, "Done," she said. "Good. Now, who else is being difficult?" Castle Black, Ned and Mormont, 298 AC. Ned went north himself. He went because someone with authority had to go, and because Ned Stark did not ask men to go places, he would not go himself. He left the small council in Robert's hands, and Varys's intelligence, and Tyrion Lannister, who had been appointed Master of Coin 2 weeks after the Great Council, in a move that surprised everyone and that Ned had recommended because the Treasury needed someone who actually understood money, and Tyrion actually understood money. He rode north on the King's Road with 300 knights and 2 carts of gold and a letter from Robert that gave the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch Authority to requisition additional men and resources on the Crown's authority. Mormont met him at the gate. He was a large man, Jorah Mormont, built for this specific northern enormity. He looked at Ned with the eyes of someone who has been sending letters into the void for 20 years and is encountering a response from the void for the first time. He said, "Lord Stark." Ned said, "Lord Commander, show me everything." Mormont showed him everything. It took 3 days. 3 days of ranging reports and maps and the specific physical reality of Castle Black in winter. The insufficient fires, the undermanned walls, the armory that looked like a museum of weapons past their useful life. 3 days of talking to rangers who had come back from the deep north, changed in ways they couldn't entirely explain. Men who had seen things that their vocabulary was insufficient for, and who were trying to describe those things anyway, because someone had finally come to listen. On the 3rd day, Mormont took him up. The lift to the top of the wall, the slow creaking mechanism of it, and then the world opening, and the wall stretching east and west to the horizon, and the north spreading out below them. Ned stood at the top of the wall. He looked north. He had grown up knowing the wall was there. It was in the stories and the songs and the specific northern consciousness that Winterfell had built into him over 4 decades. He knew it the way he knew winter, as a fact of the world, present and respected, and not examined too closely, because examining it produced feelings that interfered with the work. Standing at the top of it was different from knowing it was there. He stood for a long time. Mormont beside him. "You feel it?" "Yes." He didn't know entirely what he felt. The cold was part of it. Directional, wrong. The cold of the beyond the wall, that didn't behave like weather. Something else underneath the cold, though. Something the wall communicated through the ice and into the feet of anyone standing on it. Age. Weight. The memory of why it was built. He said, "How long has the cold been moving south?" The directional cold. 3 years for the pattern I can document. The watch has records suggesting earlier movements, but the documentation before my time is..." He stopped. "Incomplete." "What's incomplete about it?" Mormont looked at him. Some of the early records were edited, not destroyed. Someone cared enough about the records to not destroy them, but specific sections were removed. He paused. The sections about what it was like the last time. Ned said, "The long night." "Yes." Ned looked at the north. He said, "Someone edited out the accounts of the long night." Mormont said, "The Meisters, I believe. The Citadel's relationship with the older supernatural accounts is..." He chose his word. "Complicated," Ned said. "We need those accounts." Mormont said, "They don't exist. Not here." "Where do they exist?" "Fragments. The Citadel has some. Private libraries. Scattered." He paused. There is a maester, Marwyn, at the Citadel. He has spent his career on exactly this, the old accounts, the long night histories. He has been considered a crank for 40 years. Ned said, "Get me a raven to Marwyn." "The Citadel will not." "Get me a raven. I'll manage the Citadel." Mormont got him a raven. The Citadel. Archmaester Marwyn, 298 a C. Marwyn arrived at Castle Black in 3 weeks. He arrived with 6 ox carts of books and the expression of a man who has been vindicated and is choosing between relief and fury and has not yet decided. He was not what Ned expected. He was large and rough-looking, the kind of man you might mistake for a dock worker if not for the maester's chain around his neck, which was longer and stranger than most. Metals and materials that Ned didn't recognize alongside the standard links. He looked at Ned. He said, "You read the reports?" Ned said, "Yes." He said, "And you believed them?" Ned said, "Yes." Marwyn sat down without being invited. He looked at the space around him with the assessing eyes of someone measuring how much of his library would fit. He said, "I've been waiting 40 years for someone with authority to say that word." Ned said, "Tell me what you know." Marwyn told him. He told him for 2 days, stopping only to sleep briefly and eat the food that was brought to him without really registering it. He told him about the long night accounts, the ones the Citadel kept, and the ones they'd tried to suppress, and the ones that had survived in private libraries and monastery records, and the oral traditions of the children of the forest that a maester in the 2nd century had been eccentric enough to write down. He told him about the Night King, not as myth, as a documented historical force, something that commanded the dead, something that had been defeated once before, 8,000 years ago, at enormous cost. He told him what had defeated it. Ned listened with the complete focused attention he reserved for critical information. When Marwyn finished, Ned said, "Dragon steel. Valyrian steel. Yes, the records are consistent on this." He paused. "And dragon glass. And fire, from the accounts of the armies. But the commander of the dead, the thing that was directing them, the accounts describe Valyrian steel." Ned said, "How much do we have?" Marwyn said, "Not enough. Can more be made? The knowledge of Valyrian steel smithing is the doom of Valyria." "I know about the doom. I'm asking if the knowledge survived." Marwyn was quiet. He said, "There are records. Incomplete records, but records. A maester named Smithers at the Citadel spent 20 years on this before he died, trying to reconstruct the technique from fragmentary sources. He looked at his hands. His work is unpublished. The Citadel considered it unsound methodology." Ned said, "Get his work." "I have it." He reached into a bag and produced a wrapped sheaf of documents. "I took it before I left. I was fairly certain the conversation was going to end up here." Ned looked at the sheaf. He said, "How long to verify the technique?" "A year, with the right smiths and the right resources." Ned said, "You have 6 months." Marwyn said, "Lord Stark." 6 months, Ned repeated. "After which I will need to know if it works. If it works, I need to know how fast we can produce more." Marwyn looked at him with the expression of someone being asked to compress 40 years of scholarly patience into 6 months. He said, "I'll need blacksmiths. The best in the realm." Ned said, "I'll get you blacksmiths." Winterfell. The North mobilizes. 298 to 299 AC. The North moved faster than anyone in the South expected. This was not surprising to the Northerners. The North had always moved faster toward the Wall than away from it, because the Wall was a Northern concern in a way it had never been a Southern one, and northern lords who might drag their feet responding to a southern king's political request did not drag their feet when the request was, "Something is coming from beyond the wall, and we need men." Catelyn received the raven from Ned 3 weeks after he'd gone north, and she read it, and she called their bannerman, and she sent for Robb, who was 15 and tall, and already more capable than most men twice his age. Robb read the letter from his father. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "He believes it." Catelyn said, "Yes." He said, "He doesn't. Father doesn't believe things without evidence. He's been reading the reports. He's been at Castle Black for 3 weeks. He's seen what's there." She looked at her son. "He's asking for men, northern men, who know the terrain." "How many?" "Everything we can spare." Robb looked at the letter. He had his father's way of reading things, once, thoroughly, with the complete attention that Ned Stark had modelled and Robb had absorbed. He was not performing consideration. He was actually considering. He said, "Theon should go." Catelyn said, "What?" "Theon. He's been at Winterfell long enough that he's northern in practice, even if not by birth. He's a good fighter, and he's good with men." He looked at her. "And if this is what Father says it is, we need every capable person we can find." She said, "He's a ward. He's a person." She looked at her son. She thought, Ned would have said the same thing. She said, "I'll write to him." Robb said, "I'll write to him. He should hear it from me." He wrote. The muster took 3 weeks. At the end of it, 8,000 northern soldiers were on the road to Castle Black. Not their full strength. They couldn't send their full strength and leave the north unguarded, but a significant, serious force, the kind of force that said, "We believe this." Robb rode with them. Not because Catelyn wanted him to. She didn't, and she said so clearly and twice. He rode because he was 15 and the son of Ned Stark and the future Lord of Winterfell. And if the Lord of Winterfell was going to ask men to ride toward a thing, the Lord of Winterfell went first. He was his father's son. Castle Black, the arrivals. 299 AC. They came from everywhere. The north first, because the north was closest and believed most readily. Robb Stark leading 8,000 men down the King's Road in autumn. The Vale second, sent by Lysa Arryn, who had initially refused, and then received a personal letter from Robert that was, by all accounts, one of the most direct things Robert had written in his life. "There are things coming from the north that will kill your son. Send men," and had reversed her position without comment. The Stormlands sent 5,000. The Reach sent 10,000 as promised, with enough grain to make the logistics of feeding them almost manageable, and with a Tyrell banner that Lady Olenna had designed specifically for this campaign, which was the Tyrell Rose, and an abstract representation of fire that the soldiers found either inspiring or baffling, depending on their aesthetic sensibilities. Stannis came. He came from Dragonstone with 3,000 men, and the specific manner of Stannis always, which was no announcement, no ceremony, arrive, assess, begin working. He had read the reports too. He had been reading them for years, in the way Stannis read things, which was systematically and without sharing his conclusions until he had finished reaching them. He found Ned at Castle Black. He said, "The dragon glass." Ned said, "We've mined 4 months of supply. Arrowheads, spear tips, short blades." He looked at Stannis. "We're still short." Stannis said, "I'll put more men on the mining." Not a suggestion, a statement of what he was going to do. Ned said, "Thank you." Stannis looked at him. "Don't thank me. The mine needs workers who can handle cold and won't die of it, and I have those." He turned. "I'll send a raven when the supply is doubled." He went to double the supply. Ned watched him go and thought, "That is the most useful man in the room." He thought, "That is also the least pleasant man in the room." He thought, "Useful and pleasant have never been reliable correlates. Then, Tyrion arrived. He arrived not with the Lannister force, that came separately under Sir Kevan, because Tywin had committed 3,000 men and the commitment was kept, which was the specific quality of Tywin Lannister that made him the most useful adversary and the most reliable ally. But alone, ahead of everyone else, because Tyrion had been in correspondence with Mormont and Marwyn for 2 months and was here to see the library. He walked into Castle Black and immediately found the room where Marwyn had set up and sat down and started reading and did not appear again for 6 hours. When he appeared, he found Ned in the yard and said, "The Smithers documents." Ned said, "Yes." Tyrion said, "I know a smith in Qohor." Ned said, "Qohor is in Essos." "I know where Qohor is." He looked at him. "The smiths of Qohor are the only people outside Valyria who ever worked with Valyrian steel. They don't know how to make it, but they know what it needs. They know the properties, the temperature requirements, the folding technique, the quenching." He paused. "With Smithers's theoretical reconstruction and a Qohoric smith who knows the practice, we might be able to bridge the gap." Ned said, "Can you get one here?" "I can try. Money and the right letter of introduction." He paused, and the assurance that if this works, the smith in question will be the most famous metalworker in the world and will have effectively saved the realm. Ned said, "That assurance is accurate." "Then I'll write the letter." He wrote the letter that same evening, which was the Tyrion way. He did not defer things that could be done immediately, and sent it south to a Lysany merchant who owed him a favor and who had contacts in Qohor and who would, for the right fee, carry the message personally. 3 months later, a smith named Tobbo Mott arrived at Castle Black with 2 apprentices, a set of specialized tools, and the skeptical expression of a man who has been told something remarkable is possible and is here to prove or disprove it personally. Castle Black, Ned and Rob, the night before winter, they sat on the battlements when the camp below them had gone quiet. Not completely quiet. A camp of 40,000 never went completely quiet. There were always fires and watches and the ambient noise of that many people existing in one place. But the busy noise of the day settled into the background noise of the night, and in the relative quiet, Ned and Rob sat the way they hadn't sat in years, Ned realized. The way they'd sat at Winterfell when Rob was young, on the battlements above the yard, when the boys were done training, and Ned was done with the day's business, and the North was the North, and nothing was required but the sitting. Rob was 15. He had been 15 for 6 months, and it had been 6 months during which he had done more than most adults Ned knew did in years, and he carried it with the specific grace of a person who had not been told they were remarkable, and was therefore unremarkable in their own estimation. Ned looked at his son. He said, "Your mother?" Rob said, "I've been writing." "Every week?" "Every week." She writes back. He paused. She's not happy about the knee." Ned said, "I'm not happy about the knee either." Rob said, "It's fine." "I know it's fine now. It was not fine when it happened." Rob looked at the wall. "You were in the battle too." "I'm 40. What does that? It means your mother worries about me differently. The worry is older and has more practice in it." Ned looked at the wall with his son. "She would tell me that this is unfair. She'd be right." Rob said, "She's always right." "Often, yes." He paused. "Not about everything." Rob looked at him sideways. This was new. His father admitting Catelyn was not right about everything was new, in the register of things that were new because they were true, and had always been true, and were only now being said. He said, "What isn't she right about?" Ned said, "She wasn't right that Jon Arryn's letter could have waited." Rob was quiet. "She thought I should manage it, take it to the small council properly, build the case carefully." He looked at the north. She was right about everything but the timing. The timing required being direct. Robb said, "You went to Robert first." "Yes." And Robert listened. Robert listened because I didn't give him room not to. I put 30 years of reports on his table and sat there. He paused. "Your mother would have given him room. It would have been kinder. It would have been wrong." Robb sat with this. He said, "You're telling me something." "I'm telling you several things." Ned looked at him. About when to be direct and when not to be. About how to read which moment calls for which approach. He paused. About the difference between your instinct when someone needs protecting and your instinct when someone needs the truth. Robb said, "Those feel like different instincts." "They are. The protecting instinct is older and faster. The truth instinct requires a moment. The moment is worth taking." He looked at his son. "But not 2 moments, not 3. You take 1 moment and then you say, the true thing." Robb said, "You're thinking about becoming Hand properly." "Yes." "You've been managing the campaign from here. That's been different from governing a realm." Ned said it without difficulty. "What I've been doing here is what I'm built for. The military management, the logistics, the specific problem of an identifiable enemy with identifiable weaknesses." He paused. "Governing the realm is the other thing, the slower thing, the thing that requires the patience I'm less good at." Robb said, "You're good at it." "I'm adequate at it." He met his son's eyes. "You'll be better." Robb looked at him. Ned said, "Not now, not for years, but eventually." He looked at the wall. "Lord of Winterfell first. Learn what the North requires before you learn what the realm requires. The North is the foundation. The realm sits on it." Robb was quiet for a moment. He said, "Bran." Ned said, "Yes." "And Arya." "Yes." He paused. Arya will find her own path. She always does." Robb said, "Sansa." "Sansa is more capable than she's been given room to be." He said it with the specific quality of a father who sees something in a child that the world around the child has not yet caught up to. "She will surprise people," Robb said. "You're very calm about all of this." "I'm not calm." He said it honestly. "I'm sitting still. Those are different things." He looked at his son. "I've been afraid every day since Jon Arryn's letter arrived. I've been afraid that I was wrong about the reports, and then that the force wasn't enough, and then that the steel wasn't ready. And then..." He stopped. "Fear is information. I told the generals. Fear tells you to be careful. Use it." "Use. Don't let it stop you." He paused. "It hasn't stopped me yet," Robb said. "It hasn't stopped any of us." Ned said, "No, it hasn't." Ghost appeared at the base of the wall below them. Not Robb's wolf. His wolf was elsewhere in the camp, but the direwolf that had come with someone whose name Ned did not yet know, and whose wolf seemed to have decided that where Robb was where the wolf should be. Robb looked down at the wolf. He said, "Do you believe it? That it's almost over?" Ned said, "I believe we've built what we needed to build. Whether that's enough..." He paused. "Yes, I believe it's enough." Robb said, "Good," he said, "because I believe it too, and it helps to hear you say it." Ned looked at his son. He didn't say anything. He put his hand briefly on the back of Robb's neck, the gesture that was his version of what other fathers did more easily, and Robb sat straighter for a moment in the way of someone receiving something they weren't going to ask for. They sat on the wall. The north was dark. The stars above them were the cold northern stars that had been there since before the wall and would be there after, and in the space between the stars and the wall Something was coming that they had built toward, and the building was done. Now they held. King's Landing, Cersei and the Succession, 299 AC. While the realm was looking north, Cersei was managing south. She was good at managing. She had been managing the specific problem of Robert's reign for 15 years, managing his drinking, his infidelities, his catastrophic inattention to governance, the way he made promises to lords that contradicted each other and then forgot he'd made them. She had learned to work in the space between what Robert intended and what actually needed to happen. The Great Council had changed the space. Robert was engaged now, in a way he hadn't been in years. He was reading reports. He was making decisions. He was getting up early, which was deeply unusual, and riding and talking to Ned on the rare occasions Ned was in the city, and the specific bleary indifference that had characterized his presence for a decade had been replaced by something Cersei recognized from the early years of the reign. He was a king again. This was both the best and worst thing that had happened to her in 15 years. Best because a functioning Robert was better than a dysfunctional one in almost every way she could measure. Worst because a functioning Robert noticed things, and the things he noticed included the things she had relied on him not noticing. Joffrey remained a problem. He was 16, and he was bright and quick and cruel in the specific way of someone who had never encountered a consequence that stuck, and he was going to be king someday. And Cersei understood, with the honest intelligence she kept private because expressing it would be an admission she could not afford, that Joffrey as king, without the specific constraints that the current crisis was providing, would be a disaster. She went to Tyrion. This was the most uncomfortable thing she had done in recent memory, and she did it because the comfortable options were unavailable. Tyrion, to his credit, did not perform surprise. He was in his chambers in the Tower of the Hand, which Ned had vacated and which Tyrion used with the specific comfort of a man who has spent his life claiming spaces that weren't assigned to him by learning to be impossible to remove. She sat. He poured wine without being asked and set a cup in front of her without offering it, which was the correct response, and she acknowledged it by drinking. She said, "Joffrey is going north." Tyrion set down his cup. "No." "Yes." "Cersei, he needs to understand what this is. He needs to stand at the wall and look at it and feel what it is." She looked at her hands. If he becomes king without understanding what his kingdom is defending itself against, we've solved the immediate problem and created a larger one. Tyrion said, "He'll be 16 years old at the wall with 100,000 soldiers around him." "Yes." "And you think?" "I think the wall will do something to him that I can't." She was very still. "I know what he is. I know what I built." She said it without flinching, which Tyrion noted. He needs something bigger than himself. Something that isn't politics and isn't hierarchy and isn't the specific performance of nobility that he's been raised in. She looked at him. "The wall is that." Tyrion was quiet. He said, "You're not wrong. I know I'm not wrong. You're also usually more concerned with keeping him close. I'm concerned with him becoming someone worth following." She met his gaze. "There is a difference." He thought about this. He said, "I'll go with him." She blinked. He said, "Don't look at me like that. Someone needs to keep him from doing something irreversible in the first week, and Ser Barristan has enough to manage with Robert. I'll go." He picked up his wine. "I've wanted to see the wall since I was a child. This seems like an adequate occasion," she said. "Why?" "Why what? Why do you keep—" She stopped. She did not finish sentences about gratitude easily. It had never been her strength. "You don't owe us anything." He looked at her with the expression he wore when she said something that he found more honest than she intended. "No, I don't. He paused. But you came to ask me for something for Joffrey. Not for yourself. For him. He held her gaze. You've never done that before? She said nothing. He said, That's worth something, Cersei. Someone noticing that it's worth something. She left before she had to respond to that. The Wall. Joffrey arrives. 299 AC. Joffrey arrived at Castle Black in the first month of winter. He arrived with Tyrion and a retinue of 15, and the expression of a young man who had been told this was important and had decided to reserve judgment. He lasted 2 days before the Wall did to him what the Wall did to everyone who stood at the top of it for the first time. Tyrion had arranged it, not the Wall itself. The Wall arranged itself, but the approach to it. He had ensured they arrived at the base at dawn, which was when the ice caught the early light and went from cold grey to something that had no accurate name, a blue that was not quite any blue, that occurred in natural context. Joffrey looked at it. He went quiet. Tyrion, beside him, did not say anything. The Wall didn't need narration. They took the lift up. At the top, the world opened, and Joffrey stood at the edge of the battlement and looked north, and whatever he was going to say stayed unsaid for long enough that Tyrion stopped waiting for it and just watched him. Something happened on Joffrey's face. Not transformation. Tyrion was not naive enough to believe in single-moment transformation. But something shifted. The performance of authority that Joffrey wore the way other people wore cloaks slipped slightly, and underneath it was a 16-year-old who was confronting something that he had no existing category for. Joffrey said eventually, How long has it been there? Mormont, who was standing nearby with the patience of a man who had watched many people encounter the Wall and had learned to wait. 8,000 years, Your Grace, Joffrey said. 8,000 years. Yes. He looked north. And what's out there? It's been there that long too. In the old accounts, yes. It was driven back during the long night. The Watch has maintained the Wall since. With 600 men. Currently, yes. Joffrey looked at the field below, which was now a sea of tents and fires. The combined host assembled over the past months, 30,000 soldiers and more arriving weekly, the largest force assembled north of the neck in recorded history. He said, We should have done this earlier. Tyrion, who had been waiting for something, said, Yes, we should have. Joffrey turned. He looked at his uncle with the quick eyes that were his best quality and his worst, because eyes that quick on a 16-year-old without wisdom were as likely to see the wrong thing as the right one. He said, Why didn't we? Because it's easier to believe comfortable things than true ones. Tyrion held his gaze, and because the people responsible for acting on it assumed someone else would. Joffrey was quiet. He looked north again. He said, I want to go beyond the Wall. Tyrion said, No, I'm the Crown Prince, yes, and therefore too valuable to risk on a ranging expedition before the main engagement. He said it flat. You want to prove you're serious about this? Stay here. Learn the logistics. Talk to the Rangers. Read the records that Archmaester Marwyn has been compiling. He paused. Anyone can go beyond the Wall and die heroically. Very few people can sit still long enough to understand what they're actually fighting. Joffrey stared at him. He said, That's not. It's what I'm offering. Tyrion met his gaze. You asked why we didn't do this earlier. This is why. Because everyone wanted to do the dramatic thing instead of the useful thing. He let that sit. Your Grace. Be the useful thing. A long pause. Joffrey looked at the north. He said, Fine. He went to find Marwyn. Tyrion watched him go with the expression of someone who had rolled the dice and was waiting to see how they landed. Mormont appeared beside him. He said, He's better than I expected. Tyrion said, He might be. Or this might last a week. He looked north. Either way, he's here. That's more than he was doing yesterday. The Smith. The Steel. 299 AC. Topo Mott worked for 3 months before he produced anything worth showing anyone. He worked in the forge that Ned had commissioned specifically for him, better than Castle Black's existing smithing facilities, with the temperature management that the technique required, and the tools that he'd brought from Qohor, and the 2 apprentices who understood what they were doing in the way of people who had been trained in a tradition rather than self-taught. He worked with Marwyn's theoretical reconstruction on one side, and his own practical knowledge on the other, and he tried to make them speak the same language. Which was the problem? Smithers had described the method in terms of physics and metallurgy, in the abstract vocabulary of someone who understood the science without the practice, and Mott knew the practice without the science, and the translation between them was not trivial. He failed 11 times. The 12th attempt produced a blade. It looked like Valyrian steel, not like a reproduction of Valyrian steel, like the real thing. The color, the pattern in the metal, the specific cold lightness of it in the hand. He tested it. He tested it the way Valyrian steel had been described in the old accounts. The specific cutting quality, the edge retention, the way it behaved against dragonglass, which was documented as a related phenomenon. It matched. He told Ned. Ned held the blade. He had held Valyrian steel before. Ice had been in his family for generations, the great sword that was now somewhere in King's Landing, and he knew what Valyrian steel felt like in the hand. This felt like that. He looked at Mott. He said, "How long to produce more?" Mott said, "It is not fast. Each blade takes 2 weeks at minimum. With 3 forges and trained smiths, not many exist. We could produce perhaps 30 blades a year." Ned said, "That's not enough." "No." "What would make it enough?" Mott thought about this. He thought carefully, the way smiths thought, which was with the body as well as the mind, his hands moving slightly as if holding tools that weren't there. He said, "More smiths. The specific technique needs to be taught, not to any smith, to the right ones, the ones who understand temperature without instruments, the ones who... It is a feel as much as a method. You cannot teach the feel from a document. You have to show it." He paused. "Give me 12 smiths who are already excellent and 6 months, and I can train them. Give me 6 forges, and I can give you 150 blades a year." Ned said, "Done." He sent ravens that day to every master smith in the 7 kingdoms that he knew by reputation. He sent 12 and he got 9 responses within the month. Eos. The other 3 came later, after the word spread, because the word spread that something extraordinary was being built at the wall, and extraordinary attracted certain kinds of people. The forges were built. The training began. 6 months later, the production rate was 90 blades a year. Not enough for every man, not nearly, but enough for every unit leader, enough for the front line, enough to make a difference. It was enough to make a difference. The first contact, 299 AC. The dead came 3 months before anyone expected. Mormont's rangers had been tracking the cold front, the directional cold, the wrong cold, the one that moved like a tide rather than like weather. And the models they'd built from 6 months of data said, spring probably, late spring, when the ground was soft and the dead would move more easily. The dead did not consult the models. They came in early winter, before the Reach's second supply line had been secured, before the Valyrian steel production had reached its targets, before the full complement of forces had finished their winter training. They came anyway. Ned found out at midnight. A ranger made it back to Castle Black with 2 arrows in him. Not white arrows, regular arrows from the defensive line that had mistaken him for a threat in the dark. And he had barely enough to say the words before the masters were working on him. The words were, "East of Castle Black." 2 hours. More than we expected. Ned called the commanders. They came in minutes, which was the specific thing about Castle Black under siege conditions that was different from anything he'd seen in 15 years of governance. People moved. Not with the consideration of lords in a throne room, but with the speed of people who have been training for a moment and recognize that the moment is here. Robb came. He was 15, and he came with the map he'd been working on for 3 months, the specific eastern terrain he'd been learning with the Rangers, and he put it on the table and said, "If they're 2 hours east, they're using the valley here. That's the fastest approach to the wall from that direction." He put his finger on the map. "If we block this here, they funnel toward the gap here, and we can—" Stannis said. "That's correct." Robb looked at him. He had not encountered Stannis Baratheon's direct approval before, and it had exactly the impact that direct approval from Stannis had, which was that you were not sure if you'd been praised or diagnosed. Ned said, "Do it." He looked at Stannis. "Your force for the eastern block." Stannis was already moving. Ned said, "Robb." "You're with me," Robb said. "Yes." They went. The battle at the Eastern Gap lasted 6 hours. It was not the long engagement anyone had imagined. The thing about a prepared force facing the dead for the first time is that no amount of preparation eliminates the specific shock of encountering them. The wrong movement, the cold they radiated, the blue eyes, the silence of an army that made no sound except the sound of things moving. And the first hour was the hardest, while 200 years of comfortable disbelief completed its collision with what was in front of them. Then the dragon glass started working. The dragon glass worked with the immediate totality of the accounts, which was, contact produces termination. Not injury. Termination. The dead stopped when the dragon glass found them, and they stopped completely. And the stopping was the thing that turned the first hour into something that looked, by the 4th hour, like a war being won. Robb fought in the second line. Ned watched his son fight for the first time in an actual engagement and felt the specific pride and terror that fathers felt when they watched their children do the thing they had been built to do. Robb was good. Not just trained. Good in the way that some people are good at things, with the instinct that goes beyond instruction. He also took a cut above the knee in the 5th hour that was not life-threatening, and that Ned found out about after the battle when Robb mentioned it with the matter-of-fact brevity of someone who considers the mention itself a significant degree of acknowledgement. Ned sat beside him while the Maester worked. He said, "Your mother is going to want to hear about this from you before anyone else." Robb said, "I know," he said. "Write to her tonight." Robb said, "I will." He paused. "We held." Ned said, "We held." Robb said, "It works. The dragon glass." He looked at the eastern sky, which was lightning now. "It actually works." Ned said, "Yes." Robb said, "Then we can win this." Ned said, "Yes." He meant it. He had believed it since the night Jon Arryn's letter arrived, and he had made the choice to go to Robert directly. He had built 6 months of preparation on the belief, and the belief had survived its first contact with the dead. "Yes," he said again, "we can win this." Tywin, what he learned at the wall, 299 AC. Tywin Lannister came north in the autumn, which surprised everyone, including Ned. He had committed 3,000 men. The men had arrived under Sir Kevan with the specific precision of a Lannister military commitment, fully equipped, fully supplied, with their own logistics chain, so they would not be a burden on the castle's resources. Tywin himself was not required to come. No one had asked him to come. He came anyway. He arrived without announcement, which was itself a statement. Tywin Lannister never arrived without announcement, except when the announcement was the arrival. He rode into Castle Black on a horse that was better than everything else in the yard, and got off it and stood looking at the wall for a long time before anyone approached him. Ned went to him. He said, "Lord Tywin." Tywin said, "Lord Stark." He didn't look away from the wall. "How long until the expected engagement?" The ranging reports put the main force 4 to 6 weeks out. Tywin nodded. He was still looking at the wall. "I read the long night accounts. Marwyn sent copies south." He paused. "I should have read them 20 years ago." Ned said, "Yes." Tywin turned to look at him, the cold eyes, the face that had been performing authority for 60 years and did it now without trying. He said, "The dragon glass distribution. Ongoing. We're short of the full allocation by... I've sent riders to Dragonstone. Additional mining crews." He said it the way he said things that were already done, flatly, as completed facts. They should arrive within 10 days. Ned said, "You sent riders before I came north, while I was still at the Rock." He looked at Ned with the flat assessment that was Tywin's version of attention. "I identified the supply shortfall in the reports Tyrion was sending south. The dragon glass is the rate-limiting factor in how many of the dead can be stopped per engagement. Increasing the rate at which it reaches the front line is the most efficient intervention available short of the Valyrian steel production." Ned said, "You ran the logistics." "Someone needed to." He looked at the wall again. "Tyrion is better than I gave him credit for." Ned said, "He is. He always was." He said it without the ceremony of a man admitting something difficult, with the flat honesty of someone adjusting a calculation. "I managed the specific way he was difficult and missed the more important information." Ned said nothing. Tywin said, "He has been writing to me from Castle Black. Not reports, letters." He paused. "We have not had letters between us in a long time." He describes the force they're building here with a precision that is... He understands the whole picture, not just his piece of it. Ned said, "He always did." Tywin looked at him. "You've worked with him." "He's been indispensable." Ned met his eyes. "You should tell him that." A pause. Tywin said, "I intend to." He said it with the specific quality of a man who has made a decision and is not performing its announcement. At the right moment, with the right words. "I do not perform these things." "I know." Ned looked at the wall. "The right moment may be after the battle." "The right moment," Tywin said, "will be when the words exist that are both true and adequate." He paused. "I'll find them." They stood at the base of the wall. After a moment, Tywin said, "Take me up." Ned took him up. At the top, Tywin stood at the northern edge of the battlements and looked out with the eyes of a man who has been a military strategist for 50 years and is encountering a problem that 50 years of strategy does not entirely cover. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Aegon the Conqueror had 3 dragons." Ned said, "Yes." "He could have taken anything. He could have ruled for 1,000 years. He did rule for a long time. His descendants managed it less well." He looked at the north. The power didn't preserve them. The power was never the point. He looked at Ned. The point was always this: defending the realm. That is what the throne is for. Ned said, "Yes." Tywin said, "I spent my life building the Lannister position. The gold, the alliances, the reputation." He was not speaking with regret exactly. Tywin Lannister did not do regret in the conventional register. He was speaking with assessment. "I built it well. It was not the right thing to be building." Ned said, "It's not the wrong thing either." "No." He paused. "But it was the primary thing. It should have been secondary." He looked at the north. "This should have been primary. The wind came off the wall. Ned said, "Your men will make a difference." Tywin said, "Yes, they will." He turned from the north. "I'll inspect the left flank defensive positions. I reviewed the maps last night, and there's a gap in the dragonglass coverage that Stannis' positioning doesn't address." He went to inspect the left flank. Ned watched him go. He thought, "That is the most personal conversation I have had with Tywin Lannister in 15 years of knowing him." He thought, "The wall does that. It did it to everyone." The army. The second winter. 300 AC. The realm had not worked together in living memory. Not like this. There had been alliances, and there had been armies, and there had been the occasional temporary unity of a war everyone agreed was worth fighting. But those had been wars with opposing human forces that ended and left the alliances in place, and then left the alliances themselves to deteriorate once the common enemy was gone. This was different. The difference was that the common enemy did not have politics. The dead did not have positions to negotiate. They did not have grievances that could be addressed or demands that could be met. They simply came in the organized, patient way of something that had been coming for 8,000 years, and the only response was to stand between them and everything else. Standing between a thing and everything else, it turned out, had a clarifying effect on relationships. Ned watched it happen over the course of the winter. He watched Greatjon Umber and a Tyrell knight named Sir Garland argue about formation tactics for 3 hours, and then execute the combined formation they'd argued into existence with a precision that neither of them could have managed alone. He watched Stannis Baratheon and Robb Stark develop a working relationship that was not warm. Stannis had a theoretical upper limit on warmth that Robb was not going to reach, but that was functional and increasingly fluid. The specific language of two people who understood each other's methods and worked around the parts they didn't prefer. He watched Tyrion manage the supply chains. This was perhaps the most extraordinary thing. Tyrion had no military role and no desire for one, and had found in the logistics of feeding and arming 40,000 men north of the Neck in winter the specific outlet for his capabilities that 15 years as a wealthy embarrassment had never provided. He was in 3 places at once by all appearances. He knew where every barrel of grain was, and every shipment of dragonglass, and every smith's production rate, and he could tell you at any moment which unit was undersupplied, and by how much, and what was needed to fix it. He also knew Joffrey's name. This surprised Ned. He mentioned it to Tyrion, who shrugged and said, "He's been in Marwyn's library for 2 months. He has started asking questions that are not bad questions." He paused. "He asked me last week what the Night King was, not what the stories said, what it actually was. What kind of thing could direct the dead across 8,000 years?" Ned said, "What did you tell him?" Tyrion said, "That we don't fully know, that Marwyn has theories, that the theories suggest it's something very old that was made rather than born, not a creature of natural origin, but something created, possibly, by the children of the forest in an act that went wrong in ways the children didn't intend." He paused. He listened. He didn't perform dismissal. He listened. Ned said, It's something." Tyrion looked at his cup. "Whether it's enough is a different question." Castle Black, Olenna and Stannis, 299 AC. Lady Olenna had not planned to stay. She had planned to arrive, assess the situation, confirm the Tyrell commitment was properly managed, and leave. She had 100 things in the reach that required her attention, and Castle Black in November was not designed for a woman of her age with her specific preferences regarding temperature. She stayed for 3 weeks, partly because the logistics were more interesting than she'd expected, partly because Marwyn turned out to have read 6 books she hadn't encountered, which was unusual enough to be worth exploring, Partly because Tyrion Lannister was, against all expectation, excellent company, and partly because Stannis Baratheon annoyed her in a way she found productive. They had their first real conversation in the Great Hall over the supply allocation discussion that had been running for 2 days. Stannis had a position on the Eastern Dragonglass distribution that was correct but inflexible, and Olenna had a position on how to correct the inflexibility that was correct, but which he was ignoring on the grounds that she was a civilian advisor from the Reach with no military standing. She said across the table, "You're right about the distribution endpoint. You're wrong about the delivery route." Stannis said, "I've reviewed the maps. The maps show the roads. I'm talking about the supply chain, 6 steps before the roads." She leaned forward. "The dragonglass comes from Dragonstone on ships. The ships dock at Eastwatch here." She put her finger on the map. From Eastwatch to the eastern positions is 3 days on roads that are passable in autumn and not passable in deep winter. If you wait until the main engagement is imminent, you will be trying to move supply on frozen roads under pressure. He looked at the map. He said, "You're proposing we move the supply forward now. I'm proposing we move it to the forward cache positions I identified last week, which you were briefed on and apparently did not read." A pause. He said, "I read them." "Then you have a position on them." He said, "The cache positions create a logistics dependency on holding those positions. The cache positions are 300 yards behind the wall. If we lose those positions, we've lost the battle regardless of the supply situation." He looked at her. She looked at him. He said, "Your reasoning is correct." She said, "I know." He said, "I'll adjust the distribution schedule." She said, "Thank you." She meant it without sarcasm, which surprised him. He said, "You know more about logistics than I expected." She said, "I manage the Reach's food production for a kingdom of 2 million people. Logistics is what I do." She paused. "You know more about listening than I expected." He said, "I was told I was inflexible." "You were. Temporarily." She looked at the map. Inflexibility has its uses. It also has its costs. She looked at him. "Knowing which moment calls for which is most of governance." He said, "Lord Stark says something similar." She said, "Lord Stark is a good man who has learned the right things from the wrong experiences." She folded her hands. "Most of the good ones have." Stannis considered this. "What does that mean?" "It means wisdom is usually purchased at cost and people who have it paid something for it." She looked at him with the sharp eyes that had outlasted everyone who had ever underestimated her. "You paid something for it? So did Stark. So did Robert, eventually, which I would not have predicted." He said, "What did I pay for it?" She said, 15 years of being right when no one was listening." She held his gaze. "That is a specific kind of cost. You are either broken by it or built by it. You were built by it." Stannis was quiet. He said, "You're very direct. I'm very old. Directness is the economy that age offers." She stood. "I'll send the revised distribution plan to your office. Read it before the morning briefing." She went. Stannis looked at the map where her finger had been. He moved 3 supply points to the cache positions. He did it without announcement. It was the right move. The Night King. The confrontation. 300 AC. Marwyn found the answer in the 5th month. Not a complete answer. A direction. The specific old account that had been in a Citadel annex for 300 years. Filed under a category the Maesters had labelled as folklore, which was where they filed things they didn't want to examine carefully. The account described the original Long Night and the ending of it and what the ending had required, and the requiring was this. The Night King was not something that could be destroyed by attrition. You could fight the army of the dead until nothing was left of them, and the Night King would simply raise them again. The army was not the threat. The Night King was the threat. It had to be addressed directly, with Valyrian steel, by a person who understood what they were doing. He told Ned. Ned told the commanders. The commanders had several different responses, most of which involved the words how and who. Ned said, "The who is the problem I don't have an answer to." Stannis said, "I'll do it." The room looked at him. He said, "I have Lightbringer." He had acquired the blade 2 months ago, the sword reforged from the old ceremonial sword of Dragonstone, in a ritual that Melisandre had performed, and that Stannis had approached with the specific Stannis quality of, "I don't believe in this, but I'm willing to be wrong about it." The blade had come out glowing. It had continued glowing. It was currently the most unnerving object in Castle Black, and Stannis carried it with the practiced indifference of a man who has decided that a glowing sword is a tool, and tools are for using. He said, "I have the sword. I can ride." Ned said, "The Night King is not a conventional engagement." "I know that." He looked at the maps. "It doesn't leave the main army. It stays behind. It directs. If we find where it is when the main engagement is moving," Robb said from the back of the room, "there's a way to know." Everyone looked at him. He said, "The cold. Mormont told me. When the Night King is present, the cold is different. Directional in a specific way. Stronger at the source." He looked at the map. "If we have rangers on the flanks who know what to look for, we find where it is during the main engagement. We send a separate force to that position." Ned said, "A separate force?" Robb said, "Small, fast, no armor that slows." He looked at his father. "You taught me that. Small and fast gets through gaps. A large force going for the Night King announces itself. A small one." Stannis said, "He's correct." Robb looked at Stannis again with the same expression as before. Stannis said, "The small force strategy is correct. I'll lead it." Ned said, "Who else?" Mormont said, 6 rangers, the ones who know the signs." Ned said, "And I?" Stannis said, "No." Ned said, "Stannis, you're the hand of the king and the commander of the primary force, and if you go and don't come back, the primary force is not managed by anyone with your authority." He looked at Ned with the flat implacability of a man who has made a decision and is not performing its discussion. "Your job is to hold the line. My job is to end this." The room was quiet. Ned looked at Stannis. He said, "Come back." Stannis said, "I intend to." He said it the way Stannis said everything, which was flatly and without ornament. And yet it was the most personal thing Ned had heard him say in 6 months. The Great Battle. Dawn. 300 AC. The main force came before dawn. Mormont's rangers had been tracking the movement for a week. The army of the dead moving south toward the wall at the pace that the accounts described. The pace of something that did not tire and did not stop, and understood that stopping was not necessary, because eventually there was nowhere left for the living to retreat to. The army that met them was 40,000 strong. It was not what anyone in Westeros had fielded in living memory. It was the product of 6 months of building and arguing and compromising and feeding disagreements into a process that produced, imperfectly and slowly, a unified force. The unified part was imperfect. It would always be imperfect. You did not take the Lords of Westeros and make them into a single organism in 6 months. What you made was something more fragile and more real. A collection of people who had decided to be on the same side for long enough to make the deciding mean something. Ned stood in the center of the line. He had ice reforged, and beside him, the great sword of his family, which had been taken and which Tyrion had quietly arranged to retrieve through a mechanism Ned had not asked about, because the mechanism involved conversations with Cersei, and those were Tyrion's conversations to have. He had ice. He had dragonglass. He had 40,000 people behind him who had chosen to be here. He thought about Jon Arryn, who had written a letter in the last days of his life. He thought, "Be braver than me." He was trying. The battle started at dawn. It was the largest engagement any of them had ever been in, and it was nothing like any engagement any of them had ever been in, because the dead did not behave like soldiers. They did not hesitate. They did not tire. They did not run. They died completely and permanently when the dragonglass found them, and until it did, they came without stopping. The dragonglass worked. This was the thing that mattered, the thing that all the preparation had built toward. The dragonglass worked. The Valyrian steel worked. The men who had been trained on what to do with both worked with the practiced efficiency of people who had rehearsed something until the rehearsal was more natural than the original. The wall held. The flanks held. The center held barely for 3 hours, which was the 3 hours that Stannis needed. Stannis, beyond the line. 300 AC. The Rangers found the Night King at the 2nd hour. It was where the cold was wrong. More specifically wrong than the ambient wrongness of the battle, a focal point of it, a place where the air itself seemed to want to stop. At a rise 300 yards behind the dead army's center, where it stood in the way it always stood. Still, tall, directing. The Ranger came back to Stannis at a run. Stannis said, "Show me." The Ranger showed him. Stannis looked at the rise, at the figure on it, at the cold that came off it in visible waves. He said to the 6 men with him, "Whatever happens, none of you engage it directly. Your job is the white that will respond when I'm visible to it. You clear the path and you keep it clear." He paused. "If I don't come back, tell Ned I told you so about the supply chain." Nobody laughed. He rode. The whites responded when he was 50 yards out, the dead turning from their positions in the battle line in the way they always turned when the Night King directed them, the sudden unified pivot that was more unnerving than any charge because it was so completely organized. The Rangers worked the flanks. The dragonglass worked. He got through. The Night King looked at him. It was the first time Stannis had been this close to it, and the descriptions in the accounts had been accurate, but had not conveyed the specific quality of its attention, which was not a human attention but was unmistakably an attention, the awareness of something that had been doing this for 8,000 years, encountering something that was new. It was not afraid. Stannis was not afraid. This was a practical matter. He was afraid often. He had always been honest about this, honest with himself if not always with others. But fear was information, and the information fear was giving him right now was, be fast, be precise, don't miss. He didn't miss. He could not describe afterward exactly how it happened. He had charged. Lightbringer had been in his hand. The Night King had raised something that was not quite a hand. Too cold. Too precise. And the cold had hit Stannis like a wall, and he had driven through the wall the way you drove through walls, which was by refusing to acknowledge them until the other side was reached. The blade found the Night King. Valyrian steel. What happened next was the thing the accounts described, and that Stannis had read 3 times, and that still, in the experience of it, was not what the reading had prepared him for. The Night King stopped, not fell, stopped, the way a fire stops when you take the air away from it, immediately, completely, without remainder. And then the army of the dead stopped. Every white in the field, simultaneously, the way they moved when the Night King commanded them, except this was not command. This was cessation. the animating force removed at its source, the puppets with their strings cut. The battle ended in about 6 seconds. Not the cleanup, not the management of the aftermath. The battle. 6 seconds of silence spreading from the Night King's position outward through the dead army like a wave. Stannis stood in the center of it. He was bleeding from 2 wounds he hadn't noticed acquiring. He looked at the field. He said to no one in particular, "Tell Ned we're done." The field. After. The quiet was the strangest part. 40,000 men and the specific noise of a battle, and then the absence of the battle. Not the ringing silence of ears damaged by the fighting, but the literal absence of the thing that had been making sound. The dead made no sound. The dead stopping made no sound. The transition from a battle to a field was not marked by anything you could hear. It was marked by the cold leaving. Not instantly, gradually, over the course of 10 minutes, the directional wrong cold that had been pressing south for years receded. Not weather cold. That remained. It was deep winter north of the wall. But the other cold. The cold that had come from something that wasn't weather and had never been weather. It left. Ned stood in the center of the Westerosi line and felt it leave, and put his hand flat on the ground and felt what was underneath. Just frozen earth. Just the ground of the north. Just the world as it was. He breathed. Robb was beside him, still bleeding from the knee wound that hadn't fully healed and had opened again in the 3rd hour but had not kept him from the line, which Ned had only found out about afterward and which he was going to say something about when he found the words. Robb said, "Is it over?" Ned said, "I think so." Robb said, "How do we know?" Ned looked at the field, at the things that had stopped moving, at the absence of the cold. He said, "We send rangers." The rangers went. They came back 2 hours later, and they reported nothing. The deep north beyond the tree line, which had been generating the cold pattern for years, was just a tree line. Just the north. Just the way it looked when nothing was wrong with it. Nothing was wrong with it. Mormont, who received the report and had not slept in 40 hours, sat down on a piece of equipment he'd been standing beside and put his head in his hands. Ned stood beside him. He didn't say anything. Mormont said into his hands, 30 years. Ned said, "I know." Mormont said, "I've been sending ravens for 30 years. Ned said, "I know." Mormont lifted his head. His eyes were red. Not just tired. The specific red of someone who has finally been able to stop holding something, and the stopping was its own kind of pain. He said, "We lost 2,000 men." Ned said, "Yes." He said, "We should have been here years ago. We should have had 10 times the men and—" "Yes," Ned said, "we should have." He sat beside Mormont. "We were late. We were not too late." He paused. Jon Arryn's letter said, "Be braver than me." He was braver than he knew. He wrote the letter when he didn't have to, when it would have been easier to die with the secrets. Mormont looked at him. Ned said, "We were braver than the 30 years before us. We were not as brave as we should have been." He looked at the field. The ledger says both of those things. I can hold both of them. Mormont looked at the field with him. They sat. King's Landing. The Return. 300 AC. Robert met them at the city gate. He had not gone north. He had wanted to. Several people had a version of the argument with him where they explained that the king dying beyond the wall was a worse outcome than the king managing the realm from the capital, and he had agreed eventually and spent the winter in King's Landing doing things he had not done in 15 years of being king, which was governing. He met them at the gate with the expression of a man who has been waiting for 3 months and is not performing relief. He said, "Ned." Ned said, Robert? They looked at each other the way old friends looked at each other after something large. Robert said, "You look terrible." Ned said, "We lost 2,000 men." "I know. The Ravens." He put both hands on Ned's shoulders. "You held it." "Stannis ended it." "I know that too." He looked over Ned's shoulder at Stannis, who was behind him. "Stannis." Stannis said, "Your Grace." Robert said, "You—" He stopped. He was not a man who easily said the things he felt, and what he felt about Stannis was complicated by 15 years of them not having been close and now being in a position where gratitude was the accurate response, and Robert did not do gratitude smoothly. He said, "Thank you." Stannis said, "I did what needed doing." "I know." Robert held his gaze. "Thank you anyway." Stannis said, "You're welcome." He said it like he meant it, which for Stannis was its own kind of warmth. Robert clapped him on the shoulder once. Stannis did not perform. The being clapped. He accepted it with the equanimity of a man who has decided this is the appropriate response. They walked into the city. Tyrion appeared from somewhere. He had ridden south 2 weeks before the battle with the supply reports and was here now with the expression of a man trying to look like he hadn't been waiting anxiously. He fell into step beside Ned. He said, "The Valyrian steel production." Ned said, "Tyrion." "No, listen. This is important. We have 90 blades a year, and the knowledge now exists to produce more. The smiths, who were trained at the wall, know the method. If we establish 3 more production facilities in the south, Lannisport, Old Town, one in the Reach, we can triple the output within 2 years. He looked at Ned. "We don't have the war anymore. We still have the knowledge. We should keep producing." Ned looked at him. He said, "Why?" Tyrion said, "Because the world is larger than Westeros. Because the free cities have their own problems. Because if one instance of the long night can happen, another can happen, and having the tool available before it's desperately needed is better than rebuilding it from scratch." He paused. "Also, frankly, Valyrian steel blades are worth an enormous amount, and the crown could use the income." Ned said, "That last reason." Tyrion said, "I'm a financial administrator. I work with what I have." Ned almost smiled. He said, "Write the proposal." Tyrion said, "I already wrote it. I've been carrying it for a week, waiting for you to be in a situation where you could read it." He produced it. Ned took it. He walked into King's Landing reading the proposal. Ned and Robert, that night. They sat in Robert's solar that night, the way they had sat in every room they'd ever occupied together since they were boys, which was without particular ceremony, with wine that Robert was drinking significantly less of than he used to, and that Ned was drinking more of than usual. Robert said, "Jon knew." Ned said, "Yes, he knew, and he wrote it down." He said, "He should have been braver earlier." Ned looked at the cup. He was braver at the end than he thought he'd been. Robert was quiet. He said, "I should have listened. Years ago. When the Ravens started." Robert. "No, I should have." Robert. Ned kept his voice even. "The ledger says, you called the Great Council when it mattered. You stood in the throne room and said, 'I read every report and I believe it, and we're going to fix it.' You sent the riders. You held the capital while we held the wall." He looked at his king, his oldest friend. "That's in the ledger too," Robert said. 2,000 men. 2,000 men. And we held. He looked at him. They held because we asked them to. Because we built the thing worth asking them to hold. Robert said, "Cersei is going to want to discuss the succession." Ned said, "I know. She's been..." He stopped. "She has been different. This year, while you were north." Ned said, "Different how? Engaged. He looked at his cup. Managing the city. Actually managing it. Not just managing around me. The grain stores were better before the reach supply arrived than they'd been in 10 years. The City Watch has been... Someone reorganized the City Watch, and I'm fairly certain it was her. Ned said, "It's possible. She sent Joffrey north." "I heard." He paused. "How did that go?" Robert said, "Tyrion writes me. He says the boy asked better questions than expected." A pause. "He says he was in Marwyn's library more than the training yard, which he didn't expect." Ned said, "Some people find the right thing at the right moment." "He's still Joffrey." Robert looked at him. "I'm not under any illusions about who my son is." "No." Ned paused. "But he stood at the top of the wall. He saw it. That's not nothing." Robert said, "No." He was quiet. "It's not nothing." They sat. Robert said, "The succession question." "Joffrey's parentage." Ned said, "I know. I've known for a while. Longer than you think." He said it without drama. Just fact. "Jon Arryn told me before he died." The letter. He looked at the window. "I was angry. For about 3 months I went hunting a lot." He almost smiled. "And then the council and the wall, and there was too much that needed doing to be angry about something I couldn't change." Ned was very still. He said, "Robert, they're my children. Whatever else they are, they're mine. I raised them. That counts for something." He looked at Ned. "I'm going to have the conversation with Cersei. The specific conversation. But the way I'm going to have it is, I have a realm to run, and I need people I can trust, and she's better at this than she's been allowed to be." He paused. "I'm going to give her something real to manage and see what she does with it." Ned said, "That is either very wise or very stupid," Robert finished. "I'm aware." He drank. "Tyrion thinks it's very wise. He said so in a letter last month." I was so surprised by Tyrion saying something was very wise that I checked the letter 3 times. Ned said, "He's been..." "Remarkable," Robert said. "I know. The supply chain alone." He shook his head. 30 years I had a son who's been remarkable, and I spent 30 years pretending not to notice, because noticing was..." He stopped. "Because noticing required me to do something about it, and doing something about it required me to be a better father than I was." Ned said, "You can still..." "I know." He said it quietly. "I know." He looked at his friend. "You went north because Jon Arryn said to." Ned said, "Yes." "You believed it from the letter." "From the reports. The letter told me to read them honestly. I read them honestly." He paused. "Jon said, 'Be braver than me.' He managed it, at the end." Robert said, "And you?" Ned said, "I managed it less elegantly." Robert said, "You always do." He refilled both cups. "That's why I trust you." They sat. The city moved below them. What it built. The histories would argue about when it started. Some said Jon Arryn for the letter. Some said Ned Stark for going to Robert directly. Some said Robert for calling the council. Some said Olenna Tyrell for asking about the dragonglass. Some said Marwyn for the accounts no one had read. Some said Tobbo Mott for the blade. They were all right. That was the thing about it. There was no single point where it began, because the beginning was the collective decision to stop treating the wall as a disposal service and start treating it as what it was. It was not a clean victory. 2,000 men did not come home. Some of them were lords' sons. Some were second sons sent north in the old tradition of disposal, who had made themselves into rangers and died rangers. which was a better ending than the tradition that had sent them there. Some were farmers' sons from the Reach who had never been north of the Neck and who were buried north of the wall in the frozen ground. They were counted. Ned insisted on this. Not a number in a report, a name. Every name recorded and sent to the families, with a letter from the hand acknowledging the debt. The realm had a debt. It spent the next decade paying it. The Night's Watch changed. Not overnight. Institutions changed slowly, by attrition of old habits against new ones. But it changed. The funding changed first, because money changed things faster than culture. The recruiting changed second, because when the Night's Watch was properly funded and properly supplied, and was known to be the force that had held the wall, in the year the dead came, it stopped being a destination for criminals and started being something else. Not many people wanted to go north, but some did. The kind that choose hardship because they believe in what the hardship is for. You needed fewer of those than you needed of the others. Taikiche CD. The letter. What it started. There was a moment, 6 months after the battle, when Ned was reading reports in the Tower of the Hand, and he found himself reading a Night's Watch raven. Not the reports he'd been reading for a year. Those he now received directly through a channel he'd set up specifically so they didn't get routed to the draw. This one was the official channel, the formal raven to the small council. He read it. It was routine. Supply request. Staffing update. A report from a ranging party north that described the terrain as... He had to read the word twice. Quiet. Quiet. He put the report down. He looked at the window. He thought about Jon Arryn, who had written a letter and died before he could send it through the right channels, and so had sent it through the only channel that was left to him, which was a dying man's specific honesty. He thought, I did not know Jon Arryn as well as I knew Robert. We were not close in the way that Robert and I were close. The specific closeness of people who have been through the same things at the same time and come out the other side changed. Jon Arryn was older, more formal. The hand of the king for 16 years in the specific, measured, careful way of a man who understood that careful was what his role required. And then at the end he had written, "Be braver than me." And he had been asking himself since, quietly, whether he had. He had gone to Robert directly. He had not managed it. He had not been careful about it. He had put 30 years of Night's Watch reports on a table and said, "Read these." That had been brave. That had been the specific bravery of a northern man with northern directness, choosing not to use it as an embarrassment and instead using it as a tool. He thought Jon Arryn was brave. He thought he just didn't know it until the end. He thought most people don't. He went back to the reports. He read the supply request. He made the notation. He sent it forward. He sent forward every report after that, because forwarding them correctly was part of the work, and the work was not finished. The work was ongoing, would be ongoing, was the specific condition of governing things that required governing. Not a destination, but a practice, repeated and adjusted and repeated. He was still practicing. What if Westeros united against the White Walkers from the beginning? The beginning was not the Great Council. The beginning was a dying man finding enough courage to write honestly when there was nothing left to lose. The beginning was Ned Stark reading that honesty and going to a king who drank too much and didn't read enough and handing him 30 years of ignored truth. The beginning was Robert standing in the throne room and saying, "I was wrong. I'm going to fix it." It required all three. It required Jon Arryn's letter. It required Ned's refusal to manage it softly. It required Robert choosing to be, one more time, the man who had crossed a river and killed a prince because something needed doing. It required Olenna thinking about dragonglass. It required Tyrion counting supply barrels. It required Stannis Baratheon riding at a thing that had been there for 8,000 years and not flinching. It required Robb Stark on a battlefield at 15, bleeding from the knee, saying, "We held." United is not a word for one person. It never was. It is the word for what happens when enough people decide that the thing in front of them is larger than the things between them, and they act accordingly. They were late. They were not too late. The wall stood. The realm lived. Jon Arryn's letter was framed and hung in the Tower of the Hand by Ned Stark's own order, with a line beneath it that was Ned's addition and that became, in the years that followed, something people pointed to when they needed to explain what the year had cost and what it had built. The line said, "Read the reports." The succession. What Robert chose. 300 AC. Ned went to Cersei himself. He had not planned to. He had planned to let Robert manage the succession conversation in whatever manner Robert managed it, because the succession was Robert's to manage, and Ned's job was to support him, not to lead. But Robert had been managing it slowly, the way Robert managed difficult personal things, which was by not quite getting to them. And the 3 months of the Wall campaign had left a vacuum in the political management that had been filled, competently and without drama, by Cersei. She had governed well. This surprised Ned in the way it had surprised Robert, which was to say, not completely. He had always known she was capable. He had spent years being frustrated that the capability was directed at the wrong things. Now the capability had something correct to be directed at, and it was functioning as expected. He went to her. She was in the solar that had been Robert's before Robert had started using Tyrion's old rooms, which had better light and fewer memories. She looked up when he entered with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to be hostile or civil, and had not yet reached a verdict. He said, "The city ran well while we were at the Wall." She said, "Yes." He said, "The grain distribution, the city watch restructuring, the harbour licensing." He sat. "All of it managed correctly." She said, "Was there something you needed, Lord Stark?" He said, "I'm telling you that I noticed, and that Robert noticed, and that what you built this year matters." She was very still. She said, "What are you asking for in return?" "Nothing." He said it flat. "Cersei, I'm telling you because it should be told. Not because I want something, because you did the work, and the work was good, and you should know that the person who is supposed to tell you has noticed." She looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has encountered something they have no existing category for. He said, "Robert is going to make a formal proposal, a real role, not advisory, actual authority over domestic administration." He paused. "He's been working up to it for 2 months. He's going to offer it when I recommend it," she said. "And are you recommending it?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because the realm needs people who can manage it competently, and you are one of them." He met her eyes. "That is the entire reason. I don't need another reason." She looked at him for a long time. She said, "Joffrey," he said, "is still going to be king someday. And the question of his—" "Robert knows," Ned said. "He has known for a while. He is going to manage it in his own way, in his own time, and the way he manages it will not be the way you fear. He told me this." He paused. "You will hear it from him. I am telling you in advance only because you deserve not to be surprised." She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, he could see that something had shifted. Not relief exactly, more the specific quality of a person who has been holding something very tightly for a very long time and has been told they can put some of it down. She said, "Tommen and Myrcella." "Safe. Always." He said it with the flat certainty he reserved for things he would not let be uncertain. "You have my word," she said. "Your word." Yes, she said. That is actually worth something, he said. I know. He stood. The formal offer comes from Robert. I wanted you to know what was coming. He went to the door. Cersei, the city was well managed. The realm was well managed. Those things would not have happened without you. He left. She sat in the solar for a while. She thought about Jon Arryn, who had started all of this with a letter and a dying man's honesty. She thought about how different things could be when the people who held the tools used them toward the right things. She went to find her children. The 2,000 what their names built. Ned insisted on the names. The council wanted to move quickly past the accounting. There was a realm to restore, supply lines to close out, men to send home, the administrative backlog of 7 months of everything except the crisis waiting to be addressed. The council was not wrong about the urgency. Ned was not going to move past the names. He spent 10 days on the names. He had every unit commander submit their lists. He had the lists cross-referenced against the Night's Watch rolls and the muster records. He had the discrepancies investigated, because discrepancies meant someone was not on any list, and Ned Stark was not going to have people who had died at the wall be on no list. He found 83 men who were not on any list. He found them by reading the records himself. Night Watch brothers who had been at the wall before the muster, who had fought in the first contact and the secondary engagements, and who had no house to send a raven to, whose deaths were noted in the castle records and nowhere else. He wrote 83 letters, not to families. Most of them had no family to write to, or no family that would receive a raven from the hand of the king. He wrote them to the Night's Watch record. 1 letter per man. Name, the action they died in, what they held. Filed in the Night's Watch archive at Castle Black with the official seal of the hand. They would be in the record. They would not be anonymous dead. Mormont found him on the 8th day, late, still writing. He said, Lord Stark. Ned said, almost done. Mormont said, these are brothers who had no house. Yes. The families won't receive them. The Watch will. He kept writing. They fought here. They're in the Watch's record. Mormont was quiet. He said, I've been Lord Commander for 20 years. No one has... He stopped. The Watch has buried brothers who were nobodies for 20 years. No one has written them letters. Ned said, someone should have. He kept writing. He finished them all. He sent them to the Watch archive with a cover letter from the hand seal stating that the Night's Watch was to maintain these records permanently, that they were to be readable by any brother of the Watch, that they were not to be filed away in a drawer. The letter said, these men held the wall. They deserve to be remembered as the men they were and the choice they made. The letter was signed, Eddard Stark, Hand of the King. It was the most Ned Stark thing he had ever done. It was read, in the years that followed, by every new recruit who entered Castle Black, who was brought to the archive on the first day and shown the names. Some of them joined because of the names. That was its own kind of chain. Marwyn, the books, after. Marwyn stayed at Castle Black. He had not been asked to. He had not announced he was staying. He had simply not left when the campaign wound down and the lords began riding south, and the administrative apparatus of the wall began its transition from war footing to the more sustainable pace of a well-funded and properly staffed institution. He stayed because the library needed organizing. This was not a small project. 40 years of collected documents, 6 ox carts worth of his own materials, the Night's Watch's own archives, which were extensive and improperly catalogued in a way that made Marwyn visibly distressed, and the records of the campaign itself, the supply logs, the tactical reports, the observations from rangers who had been keeping detailed notes at Ned's request. He stayed to build an archive, not just of what had been, of what had been learned. The technique for the dragon glass weapons, the patterns of the dead's movement, and what those patterns revealed about how the Night King commanded them. The specific properties of Valyrian steel against the dead, and what distinguished those properties from ordinary steel. The observations from the Battle of the Eastern Gap, the first contact, the main engagement, every piece of data that the living had paid to acquire. He was building a manual, not for this generation. This generation knew what they'd done. For the next one, and the one after that, and the one that would come in 2,000 years when everything learned here had been forgotten and the Citadel had filed it under folklore, and some dying man was going to need to write a letter saying read the reports. He was making sure the reports existed. Tyrion found him 6 weeks after the battle, on his way south. He came into the library and stopped in the doorway and looked at what Marwyn was building and was quiet for a long moment. He said, "This is going to take years." Marwyn said, "Yes." He said, "You're planning to stay." The archive requires continuity. A thing built by one person in a year and then abandoned is not an archive. It's a collection. Tyrion said, "The Citadel should be doing this." The Citadel should have been doing this 40 years ago. He didn't look up from the document he was organizing. The Citadel and I have an ongoing disagreement about the boundaries of its institutional responsibility. I have resolved the disagreement by coming here. Tyrion said, "I could arrange funding." Marwyn said, "I know. Ned already arranged funding." He paused. He was very efficient about it. He did it before the battle, which tells you something about how certain he was. Tyrion said, "He was certain." He was afraid, and he was certain. Those are not mutually exclusive. He looked up from the documents. "Lord Tyrion, there are 83 accounts from Rangers in the secondary files that I have not yet been able to cross-reference. If you have 4 hours before you ride south, I could use your organizational instincts." Tyrion looked at him. He said, "I have 2 hours." Marwyn said, 2 hours is better than nothing." He sat down. They worked for 2 hours. Tyrion rode south with ink on his fingers. Marwyn kept working. He would keep working. The archive grew. The records held. Ned the morning after. The last letter. Ned wrote one more letter before he left Castle Black. He had written to Catelyn, long, honest, the account she deserved, everything including the knee. Because Catelyn always found out, and it was better to tell her directly than to have her find out from a raven that wasn't his. He had written to Robert, the official summary and the unofficial one, because Robert needed both. He wrote this last letter to no one. The same way Jon Arryn must have written in those last days, not to someone specific, but to the act of writing, to the making of record that dying men and honest men reached for when the work they'd done needed to outlast the doing of it. He wrote, "Jon, we did it. We were late, and we were not too late, and we held." He wrote, "You told me to be braver than you. I tried. I don't know if I succeeded. I know I didn't manage it alone. I know you didn't mean alone. You sent me to Robert, which was the specific bravery you trusted me for. One person to another. That is how the chain works." He wrote, 2,000 men. Their names are in the record. I wrote them all. I thought you should know that. He wrote, "The wall stands. The North remembers. The realm is as intact as realms ever are, which is imperfectly and in need of continued attention, which is what I am going back to provide." He wrote, "Be braver than me, you said. I told that to Robert. I'll tell it to Rob someday, when Rob is old enough for the weight of it. I'll tell it to whoever is sitting in the Tower of the Hand when the next thing arrives, because the next thing always arrives, and the answer to the next thing is always the same. Look at what's real. Say it plainly. Build toward it together." He wrote, "That is all the wisdom I have." It was enough this time. He folded the letter. He did not address it. He left it in the Night's Watch archive, filed under the campaign records, without ceremony. It was found 3 years later by a young recruit who had been sent to the archive on his first day and told to read the names. The recruit read the names. Then he found the letter. He read it 3 times. He folded it back along its original lines and put it back exactly where he found it. He went back to training. He trained hard. He was braver than he thought he was. That was the chain.